I had a client not too long ago who went and did a speech at a local event, and her assistant came to listen. And when they got back to the office, her assistant said, "I didn't know you knew all that." And so there was someone who saw her every day and saw what she did, knew the ins and outs of what she did, but actually didn't realize the thought leadership behind it. And that's the sort of thing I help people talk about is, what are you good at? What are the skills, say, of being an eye doctor that qualify you for leadership? And so, and it's endlessly fascinating because a lot of the traps we fall into are similar, but everybody's details are different.
This is Uncommonly Remarkable. We have surprisingly casual discussions about the lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. Think of this podcast as an opportunity to learn something new and to pick up on an entrepreneurial tip or two through open conversation. I'm Artis Beatty. I'm a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Welcome to the show. Welcome. I am so excited to have you here with us today, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you, Artis. I'm really glad to have met you because we are, you're really interesting and fun. We had the best conversation preparing for this, so I've been looking forward to this for days and days.
Well, that is awesome because I'm really excited. When we first got to meet each other, you mentioned a couple things that I just could not believe I'd never thought of before. And so I'm really excited to share that with people who might be listening or watching us today. And so why don't we start by maybe going to the background of what you're doing today, because you are using 30 years of learned skill to help teach people to be better presenters. And I just find that amazing.
Well, thank you. It's so I was an international opera director for 30 years, and including running an opera company, and that was great fun. And then I got to the point where it was time to do something else, and so I went off and what else was I going to do except leverage what I had learned in 30 years of working with opera companies and training opera singers and running a company and all of that, to help people be heard, and particularly to help women's voices be heard, because I was one of the early opera directors, the early women opera directors in America, and I kept hitting a glass ceiling. So a large part of what I do is help professional women who are hitting a glass ceiling, who get to the point where he said, okay, you get to go so far, but no farther. And I think about that a lot. What I do now is I am a presentation skills trainer and executive coach, which means that I talk about how do you show up as the person who should be listened to, the leader. So for me, I do leadership training. Lots of people do leadership training. My aspect of leadership training is, how do you talk about what you're good at so that people hear that and they go, wow. I had a client not too long ago who went and did a speech at a local event, and her assistant came to listen. And when they got back to the office, her assistant said, "I didn't know you knew all that." And so there was someone who saw her every day and saw what she did, knew the ins and outs of what she did, but actually didn't realize the thought leadership behind it. And that's the sort of thing I help people talk about is, what are you good at? What are the skills, say, of being an eye doctor that qualify you for leadership? And so, and it's endlessly fascinating because a lot of the traps we fall into are similar, but everybody's details are different.
So when it's interesting for me to think about the journey that would have brought you to this, though, right? So if I am remembering correctly, you grew up an actress and you were involved in acting, and you went off to college, and it was after that you found directing and the opera. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I like to think that I've been dedicated to the art of great communication. It's all communication, basically. I'm all about communication. I like to think I've been dedicated to that since I first walked on stage at the age of 5. And, and afterwards, I heard my mom say that I was the best damn bunny rabbit ever to grace the stage of the Hillside School. And I thought, oh, they like it. I love it. So I kept on doing that in Portland, Oregon, in a small children's theater. I was the kid who was always putting on little skits for when friends of my mother's came over to visit after school. And so they sent me to the children's theater for acting lessons until I grew out of it. And I never grew out of it.
Oh,
so,
wow.
So that was fine. In my little, I went to a small independent school, and in my little circle, I was a big dog. And then I went to college in Connecticut with all these kids in the theater department who'd been trained by Broadway actors in their high schools. And, everybody was a big dog. And a lot of them were like much bigger dogs than I was. That was an adjustment. It was like, I wasn't the best. I had to figure out what I was. And then I figured out that I was actually better as a director than I was as an actor. I'm a planner. I'm a problem solver. I like to see the whole picture and where we're going. And then with a parallel interest in languages, I loved listening to the opera. When I moved to New York after college and, worked as a runner for a company, I was a messenger. I realized that there were small opera companies where you could start. And so I started in a little itty bitty opera company where I was 50% of the staff. And I loved it. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And then I worked my way up from driving the truck and sweeping the stage to directing at the Metropolitan Opera in New York, or in Argentina, and in, around the world, in Europe, Argentina, and even to Japan, although that was with the Met Opera tour. So I was one of the staff directors with the Metropolitan Opera directing in Japan. And I really tried to figure out how to tell the crew what to do in Japanese, but my Japanese was pretty bad. I only had 5 verbs, and there's only so much you could say with 5 verbs. So,
now you speak 5 languages, though, right?
Right. Japanese is not one
It's
of them.
not
I
one
only
of those.
remember a little
Okay.
bit. But because of the opera, English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish, and I married a German, so I married into a German family, and I live half the year in Austria, where I work with my European clients, and we don't have a big time difference. And then in the U.S., I was in San Francisco for many years. I'm now in Portland, Oregon, and so I work with the U.S. clients. It's sort of 3 months at a time. It works out to do that.
So you found your way back to Portland.
I did. Yes, I moved back into the family house where, and we live here now in the house I grew up in.
Oh, wow.
As opposed to a little tiny 1-bedroom in San Francisco in the fog belt. Where in the summer the sun never comes out.
Right.
So it was, and things change it was time to do something different and do something new.
What about the opera, though, attracted you?
So since I was 5, I was working with this children's theater where we did fairy tales. So I grew up with stories. It's all about great stories. And so you've got theater, and you've got music, and you've got languages. I'm really interested in words and how people communicate, and travel. So it took me around the world, and that the things I really loved were the grandeur and also the challenge of putting it together and telling that story in a way that works for everybody. Uh, when I left the opera, people knew who I was. People knew me as, I was fairly well known at my level, and I had to then sell myself to businesses when I moved into being a presentation skills trainer.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to actually talk about what I was doing. I had to change the story. So it's all about stories. How do you tell stories? Stories are the way people get involved. Stories are how we process. We remember stories more than we remember facts. And so what I had to do was talk about directing opera was like having a vision, meeting with a team of really talented people, most of whom thought they could do it better than I could, and then convincing them to use my vision, pulling them through the project and getting the best out of each person on the way, and then delivering the result by the deadline. Because 8:00 Saturday night is going to roll around and there are going to be people sitting in that theater who've paid a lot for those tickets.
And so as you think about the work you were doing when you were directing, and you directed some fairly well-known opera performers and singers, right? How did you?
Luciano, Pavarotti, and Plácido, Domingo are the names people know, but I know a
Wow.
lot of others, but those are the names that most people know.
And so you had to develop this skill set to be able to get people who were very famous, who probably really knew that they were great, to follow instruction and to do things that you needed them to do in order to make the show even greater. Those types of skills you developed directing opera, and those are the types of skills that now you are using to help other people understand how to present themselves as well.
Yes, exactly. And actually in opera, it was easy because it was much easier than it is in business, because in opera, everybody knows you need someone who's the outside eye. So I had a very defined role, and people said, yes, you are the person who's going to tell me what I look like on stage. And that's what I find with speakers and presenters, whether it's within your organization, you're speaking in meetings, or are you speaking on a panel? Are you speaking at a local event? Or are you giving a keynote speech to 5,000 people? You can't see yourself. You need someone who can watch and analyze. And basically, it's really hard to tell your own story. So what you really need someone else to bounce it off you, because as the saying goes, you can't see the label when you're inside the bottle.
Very true. Very true. And so then what sparked your transition? Because it seems like you were doing well, you were directing, you were working around the world, but somewhere in there you decided that that wasn't going to be where you ultimately landed. What made that happen?
Well, I wanted to run an opera company. I knew I'd be good at it. And also as a director, you are dependent on someone else to pick up the phone and call you. I couldn't control whether I worked or when I worked. So I wanted to run my own company. And so for about 3 years, I applied whenever there was a general director or artistic director position coming open, 3 or 4 times a year. As I said, I was one of the early women. So I was always on the short list, number 2, number 3, and I always saw the job go to a man. And what I didn't figure out until later is that I was marketing myself wrong. And it wasn't until I started my own company and I had to, so I knew how to put together the company. I had a place. I'd been invited to create a company that would give opportunities to young singers.
Okay.
So partly educational, partly basically a performance company with a lot of big educational component. But to launch it, I had to raise $100,000, which sure wasn't in my bank account. And to do that, I had to speak to raise money. And that's where, when I first started, I was pretty terrible. I was terrified and terrible. And that's where I discovered the art of presentation skills. That's what saved me. I did my first few fundraisers. Lovely people. They knew me. They liked me. They were very friendly, and they left with their wallets still in their pockets. And a presentation skills trainer who liked music came to one of these and called me up the next day and said, there's some things you could do that would make this easier.
Oh.
And one of the things that happens with a lot of women, especially, is I was afraid to admit that I didn't know. There were things I didn't know. I could admit it privately, but publicly. It never occurred to me that I could get help learning how to do the fundraising. I'd watched it for years, but when it was me, and it was me asking for money for my project that I had no results yet. This was just a dream. So it's just like all those founders who are pitching their software to the venture capitalists. I was pitching myself to donors, and I had to make it interesting for them. And so I hired this presentation skills trainer. She was expensive, and I thought about, how am I going to do this? And then I thought that my commitment to the people who would be helped and transformed by coming to my company, by working with me, had to be greater than my fear. And so I scrounged around and found the money and learned the art of speaking to move someone to take an action. And now what I do is it's not really so much sales speaking as how do you speak to get people to think about, to perceive you as the person who should be promoted, the person who should get that job. I work with job seekers a lot, or the person who should get that raise. How do you ask for a raise? And that goes back to my wanting to run an opera company and applying for those jobs. I made all the mistakes. I made every mistake possible. And so what I do now is I try to help people not make those same mistakes,
Well, it's interesting the way you phrase the presentation, because it's not just about the public speaking part, which is immediately what you think about when you think about presentation skills, but it's the day-to-day interaction that we all have with other people, where we need to present ourselves in a way that we get that thing that we need from that person or from that group of people. And it feels like you're focusing really on that entire thought process around not just the public speaking part, but the interaction piece.
So my company is called Strategic Speaking for Results. Like I said, I'm a problem solver. So what results do you want to get? And that's the overall company. And then the training programs are called Visible and Valued, mostly for women, although I do have men come into it. So how do you become visible enough so that people say, oh, this is the person who should be promoted? And at the silver level, it's about teaching female managers how to get to director or senior director status. That's where and then the glass ceiling usually comes from director to vice president. And it usually comes for women especially, when women are 45 or 50. And that's where just working harder doesn't get you past that glass ceiling. It's sort of an invisible glass ceiling that people don't recognize. They don't know it's there, but that's where, it's still a huge percentage of organizations have lots of women in them up to a certain point. but the C-level is all men. And I think it's not on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this is the way it's always been, and that's changing. There are a lot of organizations that are making an effort to get women in there. But the other piece of it is that women tend to sabotage themselves. That's what I did. And so if you're looking for that job, that promotion, but you don't communicate right,
Mm-hmm.
you won't get it. And then somebody who's louder and flashier is going to get promoted because they're visible and they're showing their value. May or may not be real, but that's where that's what you notice.
And so you've focused a lot on helping women specifically, and is that really because of what you faced, or is there some other reason that you decided I'm going to focus on I'm going to be able to help women be able to break these glass ceilings?
Well, I've been the minority, and so that is my lived experience.
Mm.
And I work with clients around the world. Most of them are women. Occasionally, there are men who will come knock on the door, figuratively. But most of the women who kept showing up and calling me were women. And the mindsets that sabotage us, I can address specifically the woman side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Never been a man, not in this lifetime. So I don't know what it's like from the inside. Whereas I know the women's sabotage, the traps for women that are gender related. They're not all. There are a lot of traps, and they're not all gender related. But there's a particular series of gender related traps that women fall into a lot. And the thing is, though, I get to this through communication.
Mm-hmm.
So having been fluent in 5 languages, in opera, you are expected to be able to speak, especially working with, say, Luciano Pavarotti or Plácido Domingo, you're expected to be able to speak to the stars in their language. So I've learned how to communicate in all these languages. My grammar might not be perfect, but I've also been the person who's had to present in German when it's not my first, it's language 3 or 4 for me. So thinking, oh gosh, my German is good enough. I know how to do this. And then I have one of my native German speaking friends look at my script and they come back and they've written it, they've crossed it out, they've changed it. So that's a piece that I'm very used to. What I'm noticing more and more is what they call the short version is men's language and women's language. Mm-hmm. So women think men don't listen, mm-hmm. and men think that women go on and on and on and never get to the point. And it's not that binary. There's a whole spectrum. But I think of it not so much as gender as single-focused and multi-focused thinkers. It's how you process information. It's how you listen. So the single-focused thinkers are historically men, traditionally men, but not always. A lot of women are single-focused to get a particular project done. Mm-hmm. And the advantage of that is that's how you get things done. And Western business was built on that principle. The disadvantage to that is tunnel vision. So the single-focused person may be so focused on what they're doing that they might not notice the side issues. And they might not notice the woman who walks in and says, hey, can I talk to you about this project? If they're focused on something else, the woman thinks she's been heard, or the multi-focused thinker thinks she's been heard, but she hasn't been. Right. Because the single-focused thinker was focused. The multi-focused thinkers are relational thinkers. And it's traditionally women, historically women, but not always. I know a lot of men who are I know a lot of men come to me who are very multi-focused and can you help me be more direct and clear? And these are the people who see the world in a web of relationships. So they're going to see all the side issues that will derail a project. The downside of that is that if you are if you think in relationships, then your ideas are you. And so any kind of challenge or if someone knocks your idea down, it feels like it's personal. It feels like they're trying to attack you.
Mm-hmm.
When actually they're just trying to test your idea.
And I think that this is fascinating, and it has so many practical implications. And I I really am a single focus thinker. So
Mm-hmm.
if there's something that I need to solve or to do, I'm generally locked in on the one thing and it gets done and I move to the next one thing. But if you are in a relationship with a multi-focus thinker, then it can be problematic because as a single focus thinker, you're like, well, why haven't you solved this problem? Why haven't you thought
Mm-hmm.
about this thing? And the counter is, why are you not thinking about all these other things? Um,
Right.
and you're exactly right on multi-focused thinkers taking things personally
Huh?
when you're not exactly focused on that thing that they're trying to present to you at that moment.
There all these personality profiles like DISC or Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, all that stuff is really, really useful. The thing, and you need to know it. You need to know sort of where you are in those, what kind of person they are. The thing that I think is missing is that the gender overlay, that we are socialized. Little boys grow up learning about bugs and dinosaurs, and little girls are fed Barbie way early on, and My Little Pony way early on. So it's everywhere, and also I grew up with the good girls don't brag, don't talk about yourself.
Mm.
You know, just be nice. If you do a nice, good job, you will be rewarded, which turns out isn't true. That's a myth. But I wasted years waiting for that to just say, if I just do a good enough job, I, you know, I'll get my reward. And alas, turns out that was a lie. But it takes a while. That's actually why I often work. Most of my clients are mid 40s to mid 60s, because that's about the point where you realize, oh, that was a lie. And I don't get to do what I want to do because I'm acting like the good girl. So you have to be a good girl. You have to be nice, you have to be friendly, and you have to be strong enough to say this is what needs to be done. It's hard. It's a challenge, and it's different for everybody, but there are ways you can deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I see that really breaks my heart. Let's get back to the point here. For single focus thinkers, what happens is in large organizations, you've got smart women at the top, and good organizations are going to recruit women because they know that having diversity in the upper levels, diverse voices in the upper levels, brings higher profits.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's been proved over and over again. But what happens is if the women do not feel heard, the women feel disregarded, they may not realize that they're contributing to that.
Mm.
That's also a myth. Women think men don't listen. It's the sort of thing that you only notice if you're the person who's being ignored. So the women tend to think it's personal, when it might just be, he really didn't hear you.
Mm.
I like to think of it as if the single focus thinkers speak Spanish and the multi-focus thinkers speak Italian.
Okay.
And if you're going to speak Italian to a Spaniard, they'll get the gist of what you say, more or less, because the languages are very similar. But it's actually another language.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the verbs sound the same, but they mean something different or different implications. And so if you recognize that if you're a multi-focused person who's talking to a single focused person, recognize that you have to make an appointment to talk to them. Say, can I get your single focused attention? Yeah, just basically, I need to talk to you about this issue. It's not a problem. It's just something I need your feedback on. When could we do this?
Right.
Because then the great thing is they're focused on you, which is wonderful. The multi-focus thinkers, so that's for the multi-focus thinkers, to get the single focus thinkers to listen. The single focus people need to know that multi-focus people are relational thinkers. They need acknowledgement. They need to be acknowledged. They don't need to be fixed. They need to be heard and acknowledged. And part of the whole relational mindset is that context is everything. So this is why the multi-focus thinkers tend to start the story back at the last century and work your way forward. To give you all because context is everything for them. And so the single focus thinker, if they're smart and if they really want the contribution, want the other person to be heard, can say, I heard you. I can't think about that now. I'm focused on something else. Could we talk about it later today? Or, go to my calendar and book a time. I have a female client who's the head of a department, and she was getting complaints from her team that she wasn't listening when they came to talk to her at 4:58 p.m. And she was on her way out the door. And they said, and then they felt hurt, where she was saying, look, I have to get to the hospital. She's taking care of her mom, who is 93. And so we worked this out for her, was to say, I know it's a problem. I really want to hear it. I have to be someplace, or I really have to finish this project. Could we talk about it later? And that solved it. Then they said, oh, okay. And then often it wasn't an issue otherwise, but they felt heard and acknowledged without her actually stopping and listening to 20 minutes of conversation about this issue when she was worried about getting home before the doctor's appointment or something.
And I think that's one of those things that I personally have had to learn to apply in day to day. So I have a team, and the team wants my attention. And previously, I may have been, oh, okay, I'll take your question, I'll take your concern, let's talk about it. But it was very difficult to focus on that thing at that time because there are 100 other things that need to be done. And so I actually started with the calendar and set aside time and told people, if you need to talk to me, that is fantastic. I'm open to talk to you, but we have to schedule it. And you have to have an agenda. So we got to know what we're going to talk about. And that has really been one of those things that from a work perspective has made all of us more productive, because I can give people 100% of my single focus attention when we plan ahead in that manner. And so this is right up my alley, because it's really this type of thing that I have to deal with on a daily basis.
And you can always say, look, my brain only holds one thought at a time. So please, for my sake. The other thing is you can also, if they're going on and on, you can say, wait, let me pause you for a minute. I think I've lost you. Can you tell me the point? A really good one for single focused thinkers is to say, is this something I'm going to need to fix, or is this an update? Because it changes the way you listen.
What a great point. It is. That's amazing.
And if you ask them to say, here are the things I want to talk about, so that you know where it's going, you know how to listen. And then for the multi-focused thinkers, you have to help your single-focused friend or colleague, give them that context. Sometimes it's, I just need to vent. Please don't try to fix me. I just need someone to listen. And this whole story of men don't listen to women is something that women perpetuate. Women tell each other, men don't listen. And then often, especially when this gets into someone who's at a high level in an organization, you see over and over that women get frustrated because they don't feel heard. They don't think they've been recognized. They actually are recognized, but the men aren't giving them the signals that they recognize. They don't understand. They're not being acknowledged. They don't know they've been recognized. And so they get fed up and quit. And, someone at a high level, if they quit, that's, for the organization, that's 3 to 6 months of lost productivity. Any team that they're leading slows down. They take their institutional knowledge away from them. And it's expensive to hire a recruiter to replace that person. And then for the person who's walked away frustrated, they don't know why they were treated so badly. And I have to say, so sometimes they are actively being blocked. There are the ones who are really trying to block you. That's true. But so often it's just a misunderstanding. If you say, oh, they're thinking in Spanish, and I've been talking Italian to them all this time. Maybe I should learn how to say this in Spanish so they understand.
So can you give us an example of a signal that maybe a woman in the office may be looking for that men don't really think to give, so that they feel heard or acknowledged?
Well, it is to acknowledge, I think, the multi-focused person, male or female, the thing to do is to talk to the single-focused person first and say, it really matters to me to know that I've been heard. So if I interrupt you, because, if there's someone in single focus and someone else comes in, they're always interrupting. So if I interrupt you, just stop me and remind me to book a time when we talk. It's not personal. It's just that I can't think about that because my brain is filled with this other thing.
Okay.
And then the single focus person can say, please cut to the chase. I want to hear this. I respect what you want to do, but I can only handle about 3 things in my brain at once, or 1 or 2 things at once. So tell me what I'm listening for. And then if I need the background, I will ask you. So it's like taking another metaphor. It's like you've got this whole mass of information, but you're trying to put it into a funnel that the other person can understand, the other person can take in. So if you're single focused, you just say, yes, I want to hear you. I value you. I can't think about this now. Let's talk later. And for the multi-focused person to make the appointment, send the information in advance. Neither one is better than the other. It's sometimes when I do this with a slideshow, I have a cat and a dog. And, say, you're not wrong. It's just different. It's just a different way of thinking. And both are valuable. And you really need both. That's the other thing is the single focused people need the multi-focused people, because the multi-focused ones are going to see the traps that you don't see because of tunnel vision. And vice versa. The multi-focused people need the single-focused people to help them stay on track and get it done. Because it's really easy for the multi-focused people to go off on tangents, which I've probably done about once every 30 seconds in this conversation. I am very multi-focused.
And it's for me, it's always interesting to have a conversation with a multi-focused thinker. I feel like once we are narrowed in on what we're going to talk about, I really feel like I get so much information that I would not have asked for, but is also important. And it's really just being able to then limit what that information is and categorize it for me so that I can use it later for whatever task it is that I have to do. You've also talked a little bit previously and I've read a little bit about this concept of strategic empathy. Can you talk about
Ugh.
that a little bit? Because I think it actually goes along with this conversation.
Actually, this is the fundamental rule for communication is put yourself in the shoes of your listener. So we're talking about this single focus and multi-focused. For the multi-focused person, it's to put themselves in the shoes of that single focused person, of the person they want to reach. If they want them to do something, you've got to phrase it in a way that they'll understand.
Hmm.
And vice versa. For the multi-focused people, if you know that they think like relationally, they're relational thinkers, then put yourself in their shoes and acknowledge them and value them. There's sort of a side issue of this where someone might be a single focus thinker, but they're nervous.
Mm-hmm.
So they walk into the boss's office and then they list their whole resume before they get to the point.
Yeah.
Or they get so excited in the how that they don't talk about the why. So if you want to move someone to take action through your words and how you deliver them, because delivery style is important, you have to address something that they care about. Why does it matter? Why do they care? I was coaching somebody this morning, actually, who was talking about this great technique that's going to solve the problem. And what we figured out is, I said, but why do they care? Do they know this is a problem? And actually, that's not the problem that they care about. So her technique would help them, but she has to convince them to listen to her first. And actually, she could use her technique down the road a bit in the conversation, not right away, because what you have to do is solve the need that people, what is the perceived need? So put yourself in the shoes of the other person. What do they care about?
Right.
Quick story, for instance. I had a wonderful client named Janet. That's not her real name, but she is a real person. And she was working for a very well-known company. And she was the tech person.
Okay.
And she was a senior director. She was actually a senior director for 13 years. Never got the promotion, never got the raise because she didn't know how to ask for it. And she finally got fed up. She actually saw one of the people that she had trained get promoted to be her boss.
Oh.
And she said, "Oh, this is not good." And so she had to solve problems. And so they asked her to solve something else. And she said, "Okay, this time before I solve it," she knew what to do. "Before I solve it, I'm going to pitch it as my strategic plan to each member of the C-suite."
Okay.
And so the CFO, she talked about how they were going to save money. And the chief of ops, she talked about the logistics of how to do it. There were people in the organization who were very much stuck in their silo. And so there were two of those, and she went to them and say, "Here's my strategic plan, but in order to do this, I'm going to need these people to help, and you're so much better at this. They listen to you so much more than they listen to me. Will you help me with this?" And basically what she was doing was enrolling them all in the idea of promoting this solution.
Mm-hmm.
A company-wide solution. It was a software change. It was the whole company. And so each person thought that it was a solution specifically for them. And they were so excited that the next time the executive committee met, they created a vice president position for her.
Oh, wow.
And she texted me. She said, "I just had this conversation. They're making you a vice president. They created the position. It would have never happened without the work we've done. Thank you, thank
Incredible.
you." And actually 6 months later, they made her the chief information officer.
Wow.
So she went from director to VP to CIO within 12 months.
After 13 years of being
After
in the same
13
role.
years of being stuck. You're basically being stuck and not knowing what to do,
Mm-hmm.
how to fix it. So she just kept on doing her job. But also the resentment built and built and built
Right.
until she talked to somebody and said, I'm so frustrated. Frustrated is the word I hear the most. Someone calls me up, I'm so frustrated. Can you get them to listen to me? And I said, probably yes. I hope so.
Probably yes.
But, it doesn't happen overnight, and then you change the way you're perceived by changing the way you communicate.
Yeah. So what's next for you? It seems that you've had a whirlwind of things to do, and the changes in your career and kind of thinking about where you want to position yourself. What's next?
Well, I have a group program that I have reorganized, and so it's called the Visible and Valued Masterminds. And I'm getting ready to launch a new cohort in a new format. And I also have several webinars. So I have a webinar just recently called Storytelling Secrets for Women Leaders.
Okay.
Because the storytelling is the method you use to communicate through stories.
Mm-hmm.
And since I started out acting at the age of 5, I've been telling stories my whole life.
And if people are looking for you, then where do they find you?
The best thing to do is find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So it's Elizabeth Bachman, Elizabeth with a Z, and Bachman, Bachman. There are other people with that combination out there, but not who spell it the same way.
Fair.
And find me on LinkedIn. That's the most current information is what I do a newsletter 2-3 times a month with tips and ideas and suggestions.
Excellent. And so I will put that link in the description of the episode so people can click if they missed the spelling. We'll have it down there for them. And I will link a couple of the other resources that you were able to give me earlier to make sure that everybody can look for you and find you and get information from you as they need it.
Thank you, Artis. It's really fun to talk to you.
It has been fantastic to talk to you, and I love learning things. And so I feel like I've learned a lot in this episode, and I've learned a lot along the way. And my skill set to work with individuals who are multi-focused thinkers, as well as my skill set as a single-focused thinker, has grown. And so I feel like I'm able to now communicate differently and better with all the types of people that I encounter, which is a big thank you to you for helping me see that, because I'd never thought about it before.
Well, thank you. I think if anyone listening to this is curious and they want to know more, follow me on LinkedIn, reach out, say that you heard me on Artis's excellent podcast. And, if we can solve some of the miscommunication issues, we make a better world for everybody.
Absolutely. And so we'll keep in touch, and maybe we'll get to do some of this again as I learn and develop my skills. I can demonstrate them for you.
Oh, fabulous. I would love that.
Thank you again for taking the time to sit with us today, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
If you've made it this far, then I have to thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something new and enjoyed listening to the discussion as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd love to hear from you about the show, because we're working really hard to bring you great content, and the feedback really helps us get better. If you like what you've heard or watched, for those of you who are streaming out on YouTube, then take a split second to give us a thumbs up or a like. It really helps other people like you find the show too. And no one likes to miss out on the good stuff, so go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't have to wonder when or if there's a new episode. And until next time, stay remarkable.